The media wants you to think inflation is a good thing. Welcome to the Rob Lett Show. I'm your host, Rob Lett. We call these segments Soapbox News. They're current events I felt compelled to get on my soapbox about. It's also your chance to get on your soapbox in our comments section. Inflation, Joe Biden's new problem. That's the focus of today's Soapbox News. First, I want to thank all of you who watch our show, whether you're subscribed or not. But I definitely want to thank those of you who have subscribed, liked, shared, and commented on our videos. A lot of work goes into creating these shows, and it's not like I got a staff of people, it's just me. They're really like mini television shows, and your support enabled us to complete 20 episodes and complete our first season. You helped us to reach our first goal. Our next goal is to hit 1,000 subscribers before this year is up. I'm certain we can achieve that. Please share this video with everyone you can. Thank you in advance. And at the end of this video, I have a question for you. Be sure to watch this video to the very end to see how you can participate. We've got a lot to unpack here today. Today, we're going to talk about how the media treat us like we're stupid. We're going to talk about why channels like mine are growing. We're going to talk about why your parents weren't crazy and what inflation actually does to your money. We'll talk about why inflation is dangerous. We're going to talk about Joe Biden's new problem and why this probably is going to get worse. But before we get started, I'd like you to go ahead and do a few things. First of all, like this video, subscribe to it. If you're on YouTube, to the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see a bell. That's a notifications bell. Click it, and it'll notify you the next time we release a new show. If you're on Rumble, though, to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a share button. Click it, and it'll share this video with a friend of yours who should have been here today. Go ahead and do all those that apply right now. This isn't my first show about Joe Biden's report card as president. Back in season 1, I made a show called Why Joe Biden is the Worst. In that show, I talked about how pathetic it was to see how the mainstream media goes out of their way to cover for Joe Biden. Back then, CNBC posted a headline on Thursday, July 8th at 9:44 a.m. saying the good news about inflation is that you get rising wages. Then, the same day at 4:50 p.m., they updated their headline to say, it's not certain that rising wages will be enough to outpace inflation. Can CNBC just come out and say they don't know what the heck they're talking about? It would have been more honest to just not post a column on the subject. This is one of the biggest reasons I started my own channel, because the media talks to us like we're stupid. We're supposed to believe everything they say, even though it's very clear they don't know what they're talking about. Well, guess what? Nothing's changed. The Hill posted this article saying Biden is delivering the fastest economic recovery in history. Why hasn't anyone noticed? Democrats are faced with a sticky problem. The economy is nearing full employment after businesses added 210,000 jobs in November. Labor force participation climbed to its highest level since the pandemic, and wages are rising across many industries. Yet, most voters are increasingly pessimistic about President Biden's economic stewardship. I'm not exactly sure why what's happening isn't being characterized as a booming recovery from a worldwide shutdown, Hawaii Senator Brian Schatz mused in a tweet last month. The answer involves a bit of Democratic over-optimism and a whole lot of Republican messaging the Biden administration has been slow to counter. You say you're not exactly sure why we're not calling it a booming recovery? Okay, Brian, hold that question. The New York Times added their 2 cents. Growth is surging in Biden's economy. Why don't voters feel better? Okay, New York Times, you hold your question too. I'll be back. But the San Francisco Examiner posted that Biden's solutions for inflation are a joke. Inflation is hurting families. Consumer prices have risen roughly 7% over the last year. Real wages are actually declining, and families are paying more every month just to buy the same thing. With these inflation alarm bells ringing, President Joe Biden just came out with his supposed solutions, and they're a total joke. For one, in a recent speech, the president blamed market concentration and corporations for rising prices. What do you mean real wages are actually declining, San Francisco Examiner? I see they put a link there. Let's click on it and read that part. Biden says people are getting raises, but new data shows wages are actually going down. Okay, so Brian, New York Times, I'm back. Let me translate for you. The costs of nearly everything have gone up due to inflation on Joe Biden's watch. Since the cost of things have gone up to far more than normal, nobody sees your so-called wage increase as a real increase. Let me say this another way. I saw this meme recently. Buy 1 burger for the price of 2 and receive a second burger absolutely free. Get it now? Smart people know you're not getting a burger for free. You already paid for it when you overpaid for the first burger. If you're posting this as a joke, it's funny. If you're saying this is your administration's policy, it's not funny. You're talking to people like they're stupid. You can't steal $30 from me, give me back 15, then try to impress me by saying, see there, I've been fighting to get you 15, I kept my promise. The public is saying, no, you stole $30 from me to begin with. I'm not stupid. And this is why channels like mine are growing, because more and more people are reporting that they have a distrust in the media. The latest Rasmussen poll shows 58% of all voters, that's Democrat and Republican, mind you, see the media as the enemy of the people. I take that to mean the media reports on things they know are untrue, or they report on things when they're ill-informed, leaving the public ill-informed and divided on issues. No pun intended, but they say hindsight is 20/20. I probably was a conservative as a kid all along and I didn't realize it. My favorite segment on 2020 used to be John Stossel's Give Me a Break. I loved how he took information that was commonly believed by the masses, then did a deeper dive into the subject to determine whether or not it was true. He didn't do one-sided reporting. He left you equipped and understanding what was being said on both sides of the argument. All of this discussion about inflation had me wondering if people really understand the importance of how critical inflation really is. I used to run an office of salespeople in Atlanta. I used to train people to help them understand why you might want to invest in real estate. One of my most popular talks is when I used to show people how you could buy a gallon of gas for a quarter. I can see your ears perk up right now. What? A gallon of gas for a quarter? Well, you can't do that anymore, right? Wrong. You still can. And that's what made my talk interesting. I hope you're sitting down for this one. It ties in perfectly with today's topic. Have you ever heard your parents say, in my day, I could buy a gallon of gas for a quarter? You look at them and wonder what planet they were living on, right? Well, guess what? Your parents weren't crazy. They just can't explain to you what happened. 1964 was the last year the government made quarters out of 90% silver. After 1964, the government started making the quarters that you're holding right now, comprised of a mixture of nickel and copper. You may already know this, but our coins weren't the only currency tied to precious metals. Our dollars were too. Some of our currency were called gold certificates. If you look at this $20 bill and you read it from top to bottom, you'll learn a lot. It's in very small writing, but if you'll look closely at the top, it said, this certified that there have been deposited in the treasury of the United States. Now read the bottom. $20 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. What that meant was if you weren't comfortable with the pieces of paper the government was calling money back then, you could simply turn it in and say, I'd rather have the gold. And they'd give it to you. Payable to the bearer on demand. Well, the dollar bill wasn't a gold certificate. The dollar bill was a silver certificate, as you can see at the very top. Just like before, right underneath it said, this certifies that there is on deposit in the treasury of the United States of America, $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. And just like before, if you weren't comfortable with this piece of paper being called a dollar, you could turn it in for so much silver. Payable to the bearer on demand. At this point, I'm sure some of the people in my classes were wondering, where's he going with all of this? I let them know that this is how our currency operated until Nixon took us off of the gold standard. Once the United States left the gold standard, that's when we were left with the money you have today. So pull out your dollar bill right now and let's have a conversation about it. Houston, we have a problem. Right from the start, at the very top, you can see the difference. It used to tell you there was money in the United States Treasury, but they removed that. I wonder why. They replaced it with the words Federal Reserve Note. Do you know what a note is? A note is an IOU. You know how you pay a car note or a house note? It's because you owe somebody, right? Notice at the bottom, it no longer says you can get anything for your dollar. So the government is saying they owe you something, but they never tell you what they owe you. But what does any of this have to do with buying a gallon of gas for a quarter, or inflation for that matter? I'll tell you. The same way people check the daily value of their stocks, people also check the value of their precious metals. Here you can see the date when I checked. On Thursday, the value of an ounce of silver ranged anywhere from $22.53 to $23.43. I'm going to be conservative and go with the low figure of $22.53. But remember, this is what silver is trading for per ounce. The quarter I showed you earlier doesn't weigh an ounce. It actually takes 5.5 quarters to make an ounce. So if you wanted to know how much your parents' quarter was worth on Thursday, you would have to take $22.53 divided by 5.5, and your answer is $4.09. Hey, how much is a gallon of gas today? Now keep in mind I'm in Georgia. In Georgia where I live, on Thursday, regular was $3.19. Plus was $3.44, and diesel was $3.69. Being conservative again, let's go with the lowest figure. So what this means is if your parents' quarter today is worth $4.09, you could buy a gallon of gas for $3.19 and have some change coming back to you. So you can still buy a gallon of gas for a quarter today, just not your quarter. I took you the long route to get here. I hope you think it was worth it. It's because I wanted you to clearly understand a couple things. One, this is one of the reasons why conservatives have a healthy distrust for government. Because when you're not paying attention, the government is changing things to suit their favor, not yours. Two, this means your parents' quarter is worth 4 times more than your dollar is. Said another way, your dollar lost 4 times its purchasing power due to inflation in just one generation. Now, there are a few practices that open a nation up to inflation, but the most popular of which are writing big government checks for things that are none of our business to solve as government in the first place. And this happens to be where conservatives and Democrats disagree. In fairness, Republicans sometimes do this too. That's why we call them rhinos. But writing big government checks just happens to be Joe Biden's calling card. We're spoiled here in America. We see governments collapsing in other countries. We assume it can't happen here. But inflation is nothing to play with.
Carefully. But this is 1 million Bolivian pesos from 1985 in Bolivia. And here's the story to this. In 1978, just 7 years before I bought this, this would have been worth 40,000 American dollars. Because the peso in Bolivia in 1978 was about 25 to the dollar, as I recall, or maybe it was 40 to the dollar, which in any event, I know it was $40,000. 1 million, what's that work out to? Is that 25 pesos to the dollar? In any event, $40,000. In 1985, when Bolivia had, at one point while I was there, 50,000% inflation, Bolivian pesos on the day I arrived in April of '85 were going for 150,000 to the dollar. And 10 days later, when I went to leave the country, they had fallen to 200,000 pesos to the dollar. So if there's 1 million pesos here, what did I pay for this on the day I left the country? $5. So it went from $40,000 US dollars in value to $5 from '78 until the day I left in April of '85. Bolivian inflation accelerated from there, and by late summer, the Bolivian peso became completely worthless, and they had to have a new currency. And I don't recall what the ratio was by which they offered to give you new ones if you turn in so many old ones, but that's what they ended up doing. It was the second time in Bolivian history since the Second World War that they have destroyed a currency. They did it in the 50s and then did it again in the 1980s. So each one of these notes in here is a 1,000 peso note, and there are 1,000 of them. So that's 1 million pesos. You can take a look at it. How many of you have seen the largest paper note denomination ever issued? This is from Zimbabwe. It's the 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollar note. Needless to say, this is completely worthless. I think they even have changed the currency since then, but they had inflation that was in the millions of percent just a few years ago.
So Biden's new problem is he stumbled into an area where he can't BS the general public. When you're talking about something like corporate taxes, you can BS millions of people because a lot of people don't have a corporation. Therefore, you'd have millions of people who can't debate with you either way in regards to how a corporation actually works. But when you're talking about groceries, now you have a problem because these are items every American is aware of. You're not going to be able to fool the general public and tell them everything is just fine. They're living it. They're not going to believe you. I was talking with my wife the other day and she was talking about how expensive strawberries are right now. She said she went to buy some strawberries and they were nearly $6. Now keep in mind, she does all the shopping. I don't have a clue. I asked her, what do strawberries cost normally? She said about half that, like $3. Occasionally you can find it for slightly less, like 2 something. These are the type of things that make people take a closer look at your policies, even if they normally wouldn't. When the things people need suddenly double in price, they may be searching for your replacement come election time. This is yet another reason why Americans seem to be increasingly dissatisfied with Joe Biden, because he seems to be putting all of his weight behind things like masks and vaccine mandates, and he's totally clueless to the fact that inflation just replaced COVID as America's #1 national concern. The other problem with Joe Biden is he's almost always had Trump as a scapegoat for everything. But after a year of trying, I think Americans have finally figured out Joe Biden's been full of it on all accounts. If it was an immigration issue, he'd blame Trump. If it was a COVID issue, he'd blame Trump. He's got a big problem when it comes to inflation, though. This is all him. He can't blame Trump at all. Democrats have tried and tried to label Trump the worst president of all time. There's only one problem with that. It's called facts. Biden's chart here shows he came out the gate with inflation shooting almost straight up. We haven't seen this level of ridiculousness since Jimmy Carter, whose name inevitably comes up whenever the topic of the worst president arises. Am I trying to be a fearmonger? Absolutely not. Actually, our current inflation rate would have to double to even be close to Jimmy Carter's 14.6% inflation rate. All I'm doing is informing you so you don't let the media lull you into thinking this inflation thing is no big deal. It is a big deal, and one of the reasons it's a big deal is because no president in recent history has come out of the gate with inflation rates like this. In other words, Joe Biden's got the worst inflation record in nearly 40 years, and we're just starting year 2 of his administration. Even Jimmy Carter didn't start off like this. This leads me to why I'm thinking inflation will probably get worse before it gets better, because for the most part, Democrats have never met a government program that they didn't like. Writing a big government check seems to be Biden's solution to all of his problems, and unfortunately, writing a big government check only leads to higher inflation. Don't believe me? Look at how Biden started off his first month in 2022. As inflation hit 7%, here's a list of industries the Biden administration is targeting. 2 of the biggest drivers of price spikes over 2021 have been in food and energy, which is likely the reason the White House is focused on both of those sectors, both for inflation as well as antitrust reasons. Tying the 2 issues together is not without critics, even among Democrats. Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers posted a lengthy Twitter thread taking issue with antitrust as an anti-inflation strategy, and has noted that Biden officials flirt with the idea that it's greedy meat packers causing inflation. The administration's most recent target, as Summers noted, is the meat industry. Meat prices have seen one of the biggest jumps of anything you can buy in 2021, with beef prices in November up 20.9% from a year earlier. The president's first event of 2022 was focused on the meat processing industry and an announcement of $1 billion in new funds to smaller meat processors. So what have we learned about Joe Biden's approach in 2022 so far? Write a $1 billion check. That should take care of it. More of the same. Blame greedy capitalism for his own failures and attempt to fix those failures with a $1 billion government check. Well, we'll never get it all, but we sure uncovered a lot. In this episode, we talked about how the media treat us like we're stupid. They want you to focus on the fact that there are a lot of jobs out there, but they don't want to talk about the fact that it's costing you almost twice as much to survive on the same job. We talked about why channels like mine are growing. The reason why channels like mine are growing is because people are starting to figure out they can't rely on the media. We talked about why your parents weren't crazy and what inflation actually does to your money. Inflation is the unseen tax that applies to everybody. Quit letting Democrats sell you on this divisive tax the rich garbage, because the truth of the matter is the people who are disproportionately affected by inflation are the poor and the uneducated. We talked about why inflation is dangerous, because if a currency collapses, all of the money that you have in savings, all of the things you've been taught your entire life is smart and prudent to do, is absolutely worthless when your currency is worth zero. We talked about Joe Biden's new problem of not being able to have the media on his side to fool you, because everyone knows how much groceries cost no matter what CNN tells you. And lastly, we discussed why unfortunately this will probably get worse because socialists don't believe in free market anything. And that's where I'll leave it for now. If you're new around here, our channel is both a combination of podcasts for long-form understanding of conservative principles and soapbox news, current events, or videos where you get to get on your soapbox about the latest news of the day. Be sure you like, subscribe, and share with someone who should have been with us today. So here's my question to you. I've been thinking about going live. Live means I'll pick a day when we can all hop on here and discuss some topics in real time. Since it would be the first one, I'm thinking a good first one would be to discuss your favorite show. What do you think? Should I go live? Do you have a favorite show? Let me know in the comments section. This is your time to speak up and for all of us to have some deeper conversations. I look forward to reading your comments. Thanks again for helping us make it to season 2. We'll see you next time.